Okay, so we are recording now. Okay, welcome everybody to this special seminar organized by the Environmental Justice Project. And I would like first to thank Professor Stefania Barca for accepting our invitation to present her new book, an excellent book, Forces of Reproduction, that we have shared with you so you could read before this session, which was published by the Cambridge University Press. We have proposed Stefania Barca. She will present her book for around 20 minutes. And then I have asked Professor Jean-Martin Salier to do a short commentary on the book. And the idea is to then open a space for all of you to be able to make questions and comments. And I hope we can collectively debate Professor Barca arguments for a counter-hegemonic Anthropocene, which she develops, I think, very well, clear and nicely in her book. So I have shared a short bio. We shared a short bio of Professor Barca in the email of this session, but I just will introduce her quickly. She's a current Zenstrom, maybe she can tell us how to pronounce this, visiting professor in climate change leadership at the University of Uppsala. And she has been recently awarded with the Beatriz Galindo senior position as distinguished researcher at the University of Santiago of Compostela, where she will move in September 2021 this year. So we will have her closer to us. Maybe this is also an opportunity to invite her presentially in the next years. She has worked as senior researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra, where she has lectured and coordinated research in environmental history and political ecology. So I'm sure that you will, if you read the book, it's an excellent book. And now I think it's time to give room for Stefania Barca to present. And I will shut my microphone and so we can hear her well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mariana. First of all, thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be here with this community that to which I feel like I half belong in some ways since many years. So it's nice to be talking with you about my book. Also, your community and your work has contributed very much to my own thinking and to the writing of this short book. So thank you everybody for being here today. So what I will do, I don't want to talk much because I am very much looking forward to the conversation with you. So I will just give you some further elements of contextualization and also theoretical contextualization, to theoretical backgrounding the book comes, and then I will give you a very short summary of what is the book argument. But as you may have seen, this is a very short book. It's called, in fact, it's more like a provocation about possible pathways for new research into the Anthropocene. So it's not a research monograph, and it is a form of writing that has been challenging somehow, because in just 80 pages, it's not easy to make such a complex, articulated, ambitious argument like the one I want to make in the book in just 80 pages. So it looks slim, but it's you know, it weighs on you once you read it more than that probably you thought. So, on the bright side, the advantage of doing short books is that people may be more encouraged to actually read them rather than just skimming through them. So or at least that's what I hope. So first of all, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the main source of theoretical inspiration that is behind the book, which is perhaps not very clearly articulated in the book, but this is an article by James Goodman and Ariel Saleh from 2013, published in the journal Globalizations, an article called The Green Economy, Class Hegemony and Counter-Hegemony, which was a commentary, most of all, on the Rio Plus 20 summit. The same summit that then I discuss in the book, because the video Welcome to the Anthropocene that I criticize in the first part of the book was the introductory video that was projected at the Rio Plus 20 summit in 2012. That's why I engage particularly with that video. That to me, that video represents the hegemonic Anthropocene discourse, the hegemonic Anthropocene narrative. So what Goodman and Saleh suggested in that article is that Rio Plus 20 was perhaps the first time historically that, or at least during the history of the ecological crisis, that it became evident the existence of two transnational historic blocks in Gramscian terms, opposing each other in a struggle for and against hegemony in climate politics. So one block was the green economy block. They called it the green economic block. I think we should call it more properly the green growth block. And of course, this is this was the hegemonic block that was mainly represented in the summit. And on the other side, there was what they call a biocivilization block of counter-hegemonic movements. What we today we will call them the climate justice movements. Also the wide articulation of different movements that recognize themselves into a climate justice approach that oppose the green growth approach. They oppose the financialization and commodification of nature and of the ecological crisis itself that has become an investment opportunity, no? And so this other block, this counter-hegemonic block, is also it represents what Saleh in her work, in her other works, has defined as meta-industrial labor, and this is the kind of subjectivity, historical subjectivity, that I also talk about in my book. So the video is to be considered the Welcome to the Anthropocene video that opened the summit, and at stage this video is now embedded in a portal, the Anthropocene.info, that is a portal on scientific dissemination and environmental education about the Anthropocene, funded by a number of research agencies and think tanks, and backed by very powerful big data, let's say, and a very powerful narrative that persists to this day as a hegemonic narrative about the age of climate change. And the fact that this particular video, among many possibilities, this particular story was endorsed by the United Nations for as its official narrative, tells us that this reflects, in fact, the dominant climate discourse. And this narrative holds combined advantages. First of simplification, No, it's a very short, simplified story about what happened in human history, in the entire Holocene, and then it's also consistent with the neoliberal discourse, neoliberal power structures and discourse, the way it represents economic growth and environmental consequences and environmental solutions. So this is why I consider this video what I call in the first part of the book, I call it's a master's narrative, the narrative of the master model of humanity. And then my point is that this master's narrative consists on the one side in being indifferent to the inequalities that are embedded in the history of environmental and climate change, and the inequalities in responsibilities and then in suffering, in human suffering, but also inequalities, of course, in the relationship with non-human nature. And also on the other side of the critique is that this particular narrative makes alternate, non-master stories, non-master perspectives, or even anti-master perspectives invisible or irrelevant to public consciousness about about climate change and also to political decision making. So it's a dual critique, what I develop in the first part of the book. And my point is that precisely undoing this hegemonic discourse is an essential step in contesting also the more the structural hegemony of this green growth block. So my message is not that the Anthropocene does not exist. Rather, it's that the Anthropocene is not what the hegemonic bloc wants us to believe. So it's more its meaning is different, and making and understanding this different meaning is really important to then developing a proper response in terms of climate politics. And what is important also to say is that where does it come from, this interest on my part in deconstructing this hegemonic narrative? Theoretically, it's inspired by this this approach, but then it is mostly inspired by the story of Zé Claudio and Maria, the two Brazilian activists from the Amazon forest that also inspire whose story inspired my book. What is important to me, what is
Stefania, can you hear
story of Anthropocene, one narrative in which Zé Claudio and Maria would become visible, would be acknowledged, recognized as actors in this story, in the story of the Anthropocene. Whereas they are completely, they in the sense, also in the metaphorical sense of the counter-hegemonic bloc, the meta-industrial labor, are completely invisible in the official narrative. Then, of course, what is also important is to explain, perhaps, is the title, Forces of Reproduction. What do I mean by that? In the sense that, I mean, of course, I explained that in the book, but just to shortly summarize what is the point, it's just like Ariel Saleh herself, also myself, I see in materialist ecofeminism that let's say the body of thought and also of political praxis that is most relevant to categorizing, to understanding, to writing about this meta-industrial global block force. And so one of my main goals with the book was that of speaking to the historical materialist tradition, which is seeing, let's say, a new revival lately through the eco-Marxist writing, through the capitalocene concept, let's say through the eco-socialist approach that is through the writings of a number of scholars that are also writing about the Anthropocene from a Marxist perspective. But my point was that this is a very important scholarship, and it's contributing very much also to radicalizing climate movements and social movements and youth especially. I think this is, of course, something with which I was interested in interacting. But at the same time, I wanted to, let's say, point to the fact that this scholarship has not taken into account the forces of reproduction, by which I mean the feminist perspective on the ecological crisis, and the ecofeminist body of scholarship and also of political mobilization is not adequately considered as a part of this conversation, when in fact it is, in the sense that, of course, ecofeminism is a very broad label, but within this this field, there is a consistent body of materialist, or you can call it socialist ecofeminism, that is actually contributing to the eco-Marxist perspective from a feminist point of view, by pointing to the fact that the history of the Anthropocene is not made only of industry, technologies, and capital, but there is also the agency of those labor subjectivities that are not considered typically are not considered as historical actors, those forces that have to do with the reproduction of human and also non-human life. And Claudio and Maria, to me, represented very clearly these forces, no? And it's very important for me to consider this not as or at least not exclusively, not predominantly as the victims of economic growth, of the violence, of GDP growth and capitalist violence, etc., but to consider them as historical agents, historical subjects of a counter-hegemonic power. A power that is embedded in it's primarily labor power intended in an ecofeminist sense. It's the power of the reproductive labor, and at the same time, this is a power that hegemonic forces like capitalism are constantly keeping, either denying or striving to keep inactualized, to depotentiate. So this is what I was wanted to point out with the book is the fact that there is this counter-hegemonic subjectivity in reproductive labors that can be that is constantly striving to be actualized and to let's say to enact alternative models of human development, alternative forms of inhabiting the earth, but also of developing human potentialities. And this is the kind of humanity that the Anthropocene story hides. This is the kind of humanity that the hegemonic story doesn't want us to see or to consider as as powerful. We at maximum we are allowed to consider these as victims. No? So this was basically the message, let's say, the provocation, let's call it like this, that that I wanted to convey with this book. Where does this concept come from? Forces of reproduction comes, or I didn't invent the concept. I built upon its early formulation by ecofeminist scholar Mary Mellor. Her writing about it comes from the mid-90s. She applied this concept to the category of women, which was part of the conversation at the time, the part of the ecofeminist conversation in the 90s. It was about conceptualizing women's environmental agency. But I still think this is her formulation is a very good starting point. But my formulation, let's say, doesn't stop there in the sense that more than 20 years after that, we have learned a great deal from feminist political ecology, from queer ecology. We have learned to also undo a certain formulation of certain understanding of gender. So we have learned from Donna Haraway, we have learned from Judith Butler, we have learned a great deal about how the heteronormativity is also part of the oppressive forces. We have learned from Maria Lugones, we have learned from decolonial feminisms, community feminisms in Latin America especially. So today, articulating the concept of forces of reproduction needs also to go beyond the feminine intended in a biological sense, and to understand that it's not about the concept. It's not about women as such, but it is about those particular social movements and those forms of labor power that are committed to reproducing life and in autonomy from capital, resisting capital, and developing alternative life projects. So it's a broader conceptualization. I don't know what Mary Mellor would say about this. I haven't had an opportunity to discuss this with her, but so this would be an interesting conversation. But yes, I think that I thought that this was the way to go today. So yeah, what else can I tell you? Just something about the structure of the book. The book is divided into two two parts. And the first part is a critique of the master's narrative of the hegemonic welcome to the Anthropocene story. Yeah, this is, I think I already gave you more or less the essential elements about this critique. But the second part which is also the most consistent, it's called Undoing the Anthropocene. And this second part is devoted to displace the hegemony of the welcome to the Anthropocene narrative and let the counter-hegemonic visions to emerge. And here what is important to me is the fact that these counter-hegemonic stories are not about the past, about some pre-capitalist or pre-GDP growth ideal past in which we were free, humanity was free, and in harmony with nature. But to me, what is interesting is that these alternate stories are about different versions of modernity itself. So I'm interested in these stories for what they have to tell us about modernity and the alternative patterns and possibilities and the different potentialities of modernity that were prevented from realizing themselves. And so this helps us imagine what could humanity be today, what different humanities are already there inhabiting the earth and constantly annihilated by this hegemonic modernity tale. So undoing the undoing proceeds in 4 steps, which represent what I identify as 4 levels of denial of the hegemonic tale of modernity. So the first level is the level of racial and colonial relations, which are completely obliterated and made invisible in the official story. So by making colonization invisible and irrelevant to the story of modernity, the hegemonic narrative is basically the subliminal message is that the only civilization that matters is Western civilization, as if as if Western civilization already represented the whole of humanity, and as if this was not the outcome of a violent process of violent relations with other humanities. Then here I try to I do my best to convey the alternate narratives that are embedded in the histories written by Black and Indigenous authors. The way they have narrated the story of the Anthropocene and what is relevant to them in understanding the Anthropocene and what the Anthropocene has meant to their people, and yeah, and so and also what kind of different agencies have Black and Indigenous peoples enacted throughout the Anthropocene that have actually contrasted the metabolic rift of the Anthropocene. They have contrasted, they have opposed resistance towards the metabolic rift, and also and in so doing they have protected life. The second level of denial is that of sex-gender relations. The hegemonic Anthropocene narrative doesn't mention sex and gender in any possible way. There is no recognition of gender difference, and also it's not just about that. It is also about, most importantly to me, the fact that the only agency that is recognized in the official narrative is the agency of the forces of production, of those kinds of labor that have been historically and traditionally male dominated. So whereas care labor and reproductive work are completely staged off, as if they didn't have any historical agency, as if they weren't absolutely relevant to the history of humanity and the earth. So in that part of the book, I rely on the ecofeminist, on the materialist ecofeminist literature and movements, but starting from the 80s, from the classic literature in that field, but also following through more recent development in feminist political ecology, in queer political ecology, and decolonial feminisms as well. So I try to blend these different components within the ecofeminist literature to formulate an ecofeminism for the 21st century, let's say. Then the third level of denial is that of class relations, because of course in the hegemonic Anthropocene, class inequalities and the exploitation of labor also are completely absent and staged off, as if they were not relevant to the emergence of the Anthropocene, as if they were not constitutive of the colonial capitalist system. And so this is also the alternative here is to follow up on labor and working class environmentalism, on those forces that have contrasted again, the metabolic rift, and by opposing by different in different ways within the wage relation and outside the wage relation on both terms. So both the industrial working classes and their struggles against industrial hazards or for the regulation of industry, but also, and this is the case of Claudio and Maria, outside the wage relations by enacting different forms of labor that are have been at the same time forms of care for nature, earth care, we could call it. Enacting different potentialities of labor. And finally, the last level of denial, the latest one, is considered in the book, but of course they are all equally important, is that of interspecies relations, the relations between the human species and other species, which is also staged off. Strangely enough, in the Welcome to the Anthropocene video, we mostly hear about the inanimate forces of nature, about climate, geology, but we don't hear much about non-human life, as if non-human life were also irrelevant to human well-being, to human evolution itself, and also as if the Anthropocene was not the reduction of biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity is mentioned very briefly as a cost, but is not mentioned as something that is potentially destructive for human life itself. And so here, the alternate story is again the story of the agro-extractive reserve where Claudio and Maria lived, and the form of labor that they practiced. There was something I attempt at conceptualizing as an interspecies being, a form of being human that is actualized through an intimate relationship with non-human nature, in their case with the castañas, with the Brazil nut trees that they were taking care of through their work. Okay, I think I spoke too much already, so I think I would stop here and think what are your thoughts about this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's well, it's quiet applause because microphones are off. And so I will now allow Joan to connect his microphone so before this exchange, we already had a small exchange of emails because Joan was inspired in many directions with the book. So Joan, if you can highlight the main idea.
Yeah, what happens is that first, the book is very interesting. So I recommend everybody to read the book, which is also short and very well written. So I could stop here and say, read the book, and that would be enough for the morning or for the afternoon. But I was asked, and I think it's a good idea, and in the seminars we are having in the environmental justice group, we normally do it like this, that somebody sends a paper and then there are some comments, written comments beforehand. So I wrote just 3 pages, which I'm not going to share with anybody else. And I am not going to publish because they are written just in 1 hour of writing yesterday afternoon. But I think that for Stefania, they might be useful or amusing. And I make 2 criticisms. Of course, I say very good things about the book and about Stefania's life and work for already some decades, but I criticize, I think, 2 things. One is that she objects to the use of the Anthropocene, or rather, as she has explained now, is not that she's attacking the use of Anthropocene. I don't know how many geological periods she considers we have lived through. Neither Stefania nor myself are geologists, so we're totally scientifically disabled to say anything very serious about geology. But myself think that it is a very good idea to say that the Holocene has ended. We don't know exactly when, 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago with agriculture, but it has ended, and now we are in a new geological period that we humans call it Anthropocene. And we call it not because we are pleased with it, but because, as Paul Crutzen, who is the originator and who discovered the ozone layer because of the CFCs and so on, but he died just 1 month ago, or less than 1 month ago. But he would obviously say that we humans are making big mistakes with planet Earth. And this is the political meaning to myself of the Anthropocene. But Stefania is probably agreeing with this, but in the book, or more in the book, because I didn't see it so clearly in the book, but now she has explained that she's arguing against a UN video in Rio in 2002. I was in Rio in 2002 and I didn't see this video. I'm not planning to see this video. And I think this video in a way is interesting because it has provoked such a good book, but in itself one can see that this video is probably is like the Brundtland Commission paper or something. Is the UN trying to stop environmentalism through what Stefania calls a master narrative. So one objection or one comment I make is that the debate about the end of the Holocene and that something else was coming, as Stefania and myself and many people here know, is much older. Comes from the 19th century, comes at least from the 50s, comes from when Louis Mumford and Carl Sauer produced a very thick book, which I have here on my table, but I cannot pass it to you through the web, which is about 2,000 pages, and it's called the men's role. It's okay to hate men in that case. Men's role in changing the face of the earth. So changing the face of the earth is equivalent to saying we are moving to another geological period. Whether somebody said Anthropocene before or not, I think is a moot question. But I would admit that nobody said this until Paul Crutzen wrote it, I don't know when, 20 years ago, as a chemist or geologist, I don't know what he was. He was not a social scientist. He was not a historian. I would think that apart from this work from the 50s, Alfred Crosby and John O'Neill and many environmental historians who are colleagues of Stefania Barca and myself as environmental historians have already said this, have said humans are modifying the biochemical cycles. For instance, the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle, or they are modifying the geographical distribution of life on Earth through biological invasions, like that what happened with the conquest of America by the colonial European conquest of America. Alfred Crosby, 16th century, and with the pandemics already at the time or before. So all this has been discussed already, that humans are modifying the biology of the Earth, the chemistry of the Earth, and even the morphology to some extent of the Earth through big dams and so on, has been discussed. So I asked myself, and what is the master? To call it the master relative is just to make things a bit easy for you. That's my critique, isn't it? Easy for you because, I mean, does it mean the narrative from the masters, the white male scientists who have written these things, because they are all white male scientists, the ones I have mentioned up to now. And therefore, because they have a prejudice, and this is probably quite the case, some of them at least would not discuss colonialism, much less ecofeminism and racism, and this class even they would leave aside. Is this the master narrative? And there is a new counter-master relative. Well, I think that the counter-master relative, I would agree with you. Jose Claudio and Chico Mendes and the Chico movement and Rio Tinto, people fighting against Rio Tinto 100 years ago. And so many people who have fought, women and men, against colonialism and capitalism and for life, are part of this counter narrative. On this, I totally agree with you, and you explain it very well. But I would question this question, whether when you say this is the master narrative of the Anthropocene, what about all the other people who have already discussed the Anthropocene and who do not share in this master narrative, including, for instance, historians, as I have mentioned. And the other smaller point I make in my critique is that what I think you're really mistaken on this, or difficult to argue your point, is that this narrative of the Anthropocene forgets about other species. It's not like this at all. On the contrary, some of the extremist representatives of the Anthropocene narrative are the people who say that the Anthropocene started like 10,000 years ago because of agriculture, and that they like wild species more than humans, and that they think that the human population should go down to 200 million people or something like this. This is part of a kind of Anthropocene narrative, which I don't like and you don't like it, but which exists, isn't it? People who say that humans are like a plague. Well, I think humans are a plague, but I mean, this doesn't mean that we should go down to 100 million people. I think if we stop growing, would be all right for my taste. Or we go back to 20% in population terms. And of course, taking into account the exosomatic use of energy by some people and the very little by other people. But you say that the master narrative does not consider other species. And I think this is just a mistake. I don't know about the video of the UN, because if something is worrying the Anthropocene people is the fact that the human appropriation of net primary production and that fact that tigers have gone down in India from 100,000 more or less, because nobody counted them. It's a suspiciously round number, but 100,000 tigers 100 years ago to about 3,000 tigers today, isn't it? This is what worries the Anthropocene people of the master narrative, except another line of them who are the geoengineering people, who perhaps think that they can make tigers by genetic engineering, or that they care more about geoengineering than about human lives, or animal lives, or non-human lives. So I have 2 points. One, for me, the Anthropocene is older than you say, and there has always been a counter-narrative, but not so well developed as you do. For instance, ecofeminism was obviously not present in this, but working class or peasants or indigenous people, or this, or people fighting a slavery. This is quite old, isn't it? This is one point. And the other point is that I think you are mistaken in saying that the current Anthropocene doesn't care about other species.
Thank you, Joan.
But I think it would be a big mistake to monopolize the discussion.
I think there would be, I'm sure, more comments. So I propose you can write, if you want, somebody wants to write their questions or comments in the chat. This is and then maybe we open the floor for more comments or questions if people want to turn on the camera and make them to Stefania Barca. There's an option that you can handle, you can put the hand. I don't know if you can see it in your menu. This is a way. And now you can actually activate your microphone if you want to make comments. Okay, so any comments, suggestions? Yes, Jorgos, please.
Sorry, I'm sitting in front of the sun because I never see the sun, so my face looks like an angel, but not. Thank you, Stefania, for the presentation. Good to see you even if it's from Zoom. One question I have is when you call both, let's say, you're trying to make a link between the care work for nature, broadly speaking, and the care work for humans to bring it together under forces of reproduction. I just wanted to ask you, what do you do with a clear difference that there is there, which, at least in my view? So if we follow like the Marxist understanding, then and because the term is a little bit, okay, let's say Marxist originated, no reproduction. So there is production, there is reproduction. And the reproduction is about the reproduction of labor power. So about the reproduction of humans that then work as wage labor for capital, no? And there is the whole argument that this, all this work, all this labor is subsidizing capital. So capital is taking it for free and then makes surplus value without paying back this work. So this is work that it's vital for capital. But the reproductive work of nature, I don't see it following this pattern. So it's not reproducing nature for capital. So it's not that the defenders of nature are protecting forests that then capital can use the trees. And then in a way they do an unpaid work for capital, no? On the contrary, they're trying to stop capital from going to the forests. So I see, I mean, okay, But I see a difference there. So I feel that maybe by packaging it, you might lose this difference. So if I was to make an analogy, I would think more of an analogy between defenders of forests of nature, but they want to take something out of capital. And then I would think of not care work as the equivalent, but actually women or families who say we don't want to reproduce, so we don't want to make children. Like I'm thinking here of Emma Goldman that Joanne has brought to our attention and I have cited, no, but she was saying we women do not want to produce factory workers for capital, to make it cheap for capital. You know, actually we want to make it expensive for capital, so we refuse to produce workers. So I'm seeing the analogy there, which has more of an element of confrontation rather than reproducing something for capital.
Thank you, Yorgos. Any other comment, one or two, and then we can invite Stefania to reply, to react. I have a small comment. The book was not written during the pandemia, but you made a final comment of the book because it was being published during the pandemia. And this pandemia, the COVID-19, it's actually making visible or raising again on the value of this reproductive work. I don't know if how do you think this could be an opportunity to maybe challenge this narrative, or do you see this happening, or how can this be done better, to use this moment as a shifting board, as an opportunity to make visible all this reproductive work? Any other comment or question? So maybe we can ask Stefania to react to all these very challenging points made.
Yes, so first of all, thank you very much for these questions. They're all big, important aspects of the book. I will try to be brief, not to take too much time, but just let me start with clarifying about the Anthropocene versus Holocene issue that Joanne was raising. I think that, Joanne, you're absolutely right. Everything you say, of course, is true. But I think that here the problem is that perhaps this is, I know that the book was going to originate this kind of equivocation, but I am not engaging with the whole Anthropocene literature. It would be, I don't even know if that is humanly possible, because it's an enormous literature, and there are enormous differences and nuances within it. And as you rightly point out, it's not just what we now call the Anthropocene, is what environmental historians have been doing for decades, even before the term Anthropocene was invented. And I think the difference is basically that at some point, scientists reached the sort of consensus on the fact that there was, in fact, something going on that could be categorized as climate change, and that this was anthropogenic. So this made a difference. But aside from that, environmental historians have been talking about humans changing the face of the earth since many decades. So this is it wouldn't be mine is not a history of environmental thinking. It would be a different project. That would be a different project altogether. My point was more limited, more restricted. I wanted to engage with the performativity of one specific story. And the video that I criticize, it was projected in 2012 at the most important, let's say, world summit of environmental decision making. And so it was highly performative. And it did actually produce what it was meant to produce, a consensual, post-political understanding of the Anthropocene through one particular narrative mechanism, this dispositive, if you want, the use of this fictitious we subject. So basically, if you want, what I am doing in the first part of the book, I am engaging with the we subject of the story by saying that this is a fictitious character and that there is not such a thing as a homogeneous humanity. This doesn't exist, it's never existed. And so positing this as the subject of the Anthropocene is an enormous mystification. And we don't gain anything from accepting this particular articulation of the story. We don't gain a better an understanding of, a proper understanding of the challenges that we have, that we are facing. So it's not like, as many would say, okay, let's accept that there is something called Anthropocene and that this is the big question. It's a big issue, humanity versus nature. And then all other are sub issues like gender, coloniality, or class and species. These are minor problems, no? The way the Marxist orthodoxy once used to consider gender with respect to the class struggle. So the class struggle was the main issue, and then gender was a subcategory, sub problem. This is wrong, and this is not taking us anywhere near understanding what we are facing, because what we are facing is basically it's the master model of modernity. So what we are needing is a different, as Val Plumwood used to say, who is of course a major source of inspiration in the book, we will go on in a different mode of humanity or not at all. So what we do need is to find this different mode of humanity. And the we subject of the Anthropocene story doesn't help us to do that. So yeah, in a sense, I agree with you, and I disagree in the sense that my goal is much more restricted and specific than what you were saying. So probably the misunderstanding, it's my fault. Actually, for sure, it's my fault in the sense that perhaps I wasn't abundantly clear about this in the way I organized the book. And other species, yeah, this is the same thing in the sense that, of course, so many environmental thinkers, even in non-critical of capitalism or the master model, but still they have been concerned with biodiversity. But again, if you go back to the hegemonic Anthropocene story, then I think there is a, I think that, I mean, at least my understanding of it is that the main issue there it's not the loss of biodiversity. That is like a secondary problem. The main problem there is climate change, is global warming, is the alterations of the earth systems, as if, I mean, in the sense that this is considered the forces of nature that are revolting against us again. So biodiversity is like a side effect of all this. It's considered as a side effect of all this. It's not the main problem of Anthropocene discourse. Yorgos, the reproductive labor I'm talking about, it's not exactly the same as the social reproduction theory or the feminist political economy used to conceptualize, Marxist feminism used to conceptualize reproductive labor back in the 70s. That was, of course, a very important way of making visible the reproductive labor within capitalism, no? Pointing to the fact that this labor is producing specifically women. This was the subject of that debate. We're producing labor capital, labor power for capital, no? But nowadays, I think that the ecofeminist approach is quite different from that. It's pointing to this labor of life making. This is what now is it's more becoming more and more a central concept. Life making as opposed to capital making, to capital accumulation. So it's a labor that actually resists this assumption within capitalist circuits. So reproductive labor, in this sense, the forces of reproduction are not all women on the earth. They are not all people who are giving birth to human beings that will become waged labor. That's why I'm saying that mine is a different articulation of the concept. And but what is interesting is that all the feminist debate of, for example, the wages for housework debate movement that still exists and that is still led by Selma James. In her 90s now. Her latest book is coming out this year from PM Press. So they have actually, they have been, let's say, thinking about this, exactly this point, no? And the fact that now today the point is not to talk about how women's work contributes to the accumulation of capital and profit making, and so it should be rewarded for this reason. It's actually changed the argument. The argument now is that reproductive labor and care labor are actually resisting that, and they are actually producing life for its own sake, for the sake of life. And so this is why they should be recognized. This is the contribution that they are should be recognized to them, not the contribution to value making in the capitalist sense of the term, but to the contribution to life making. And this has to do with Mariana's question on COVID. Yes, I had added a short, under suggestion of one of the reviewers, added this short post scriptum on the pandemic. On the one hand, because I think the pandemic makes very clear how the connection, the nexus that exists between the master model of modernity on the ecological crisis and also the crisis in care and the crisis in global health, how the three are really interconnected. But at the same time, I also wanted to somehow endorse, which I have been doing also, this perspective of care work as the solution, let's say, in the sense of supporting care work as a form of labor power that has the potentiality for enhancing a different a different model of human development. So for me, to me, the work of Claudio and Maria was work of earthcare, and by which it's not meant just caring for the environment, like somebody who is doing it for free in their spare time, but it's more like caring for this different mode of humanity, the interspecies mode of humanity, in which one is I mean, we are at one with the earth, and yeah, so our development as human beings has to do with the well-being of non-human nature. They are strictly connected, and so the pandemic somehow called attention on the essentiality of care work, of the work of caring for human beings, but at the same time, also on the essentiality of the work of caring for the non-human world, because the well-being and the health of the non-human world is not separate from our own. So this, I think, is the message, the basic message that we can draw from the pandemic.
Thank you, Stefania. Very clear answer. So I think Panagiota has a question. And if somebody else wants to raise a hand or write on the chat a question, please do.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Stefania, for this very concise kind of presentation. I didn't finish the book, but I enjoyed the parts I have read so far. And it's a companion before going to sleep these days, and I'm really enjoying it. It's funny because right today, when I remembered that this presentation of yours was, I accidentally was looking at a video, and there was Anna Tsing there talking about how she does choose to talk about the Anthropocene, but doing that while pushing it open. So like she explains, you know, I kind of want to be in solidarity with those scientists that have discovered certain trends, and, you know, the climate scientists and geologists, etc. But at the same time, and I think you referred to this, to her work in your book, when she talks about the plantation scene. So yeah, I understand. I think I understand your point of view, and I very much agree with that. And I think that it's very useful to kind of open up concepts that have become so dominant, because it seems like all we talk about today is the Anthropocene. So kind of it matters what thoughts we think with, what concepts we conceptualize with, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to say that while I heard you talking about the forces of reproduction and what you kind of, who do you imagine being part of these forces of reproduction, and then talking about COVID essentiality, so far in the book, I struggle to situate a bit the position of people who are performing care work in the sense that you have explained it, like reproductive work, but who are at the same time entangled in the growth machine. And I'm thinking here about the immigrant farm workers in Europe, for example, or in the US, who are kind of, you know, a part of this essential and life-giving work of cultivating food, but and they were recognized as essential during the pandemic, although, you know, in reality, nothing of their condition really changed. In fact, they were mostly affected by COVID. But so where do they sit in your kind of conceptual frame? Maybe I haven't read far enough into the book, but so far, yeah, maybe you can tell us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Panagiota. Maybe one or two questions more. Eleonora, did you have a comment? Yes, please.
Yeah, I just had a comment. First of all, thank you very much, Stefania, for the presentation and for the book. I really like it and I really enjoy it. And I just wanted to point out that I really like this short book, because as you said, I could read the book all throughout in one day. And I think it was really, you know, give you like this comprehensive view of what the book is about. So I really appreciate this also short version of a book. And yeah, I just had like some comments that I really, I mean, some concepts in the book that I really like, just as environmental justice narratives. I really like the fact that you know, that the book starts with like this narrative justice, no? And I find this concept very important for me, because obviously, like when we speak about the Anthropocene, it's super important to create the other counter narrative, because for me, I mean, I'm working with issues related to conservation, and when I was in the field and working with NGOs there, we were always taught we need to create another narrative of conservation, not because I struggle so much when I speak about like the issue related of the protection of biodiversity, because of these master narratives you speak about. So I think this is super important, how to create another narrative, because I think that with the current, you know, like hegemonic narrative of the Anthropocene, we create even much more dichotomy, I feel, no? This dichotomy that also creates those green solutions that we know about. So this was just a comment. And so also like a small question, I want to understand and how as academic researcher, I was thinking, can we best challenge this hegemonic narrative, and how do we communicate better this other narrative? And if we are doing enough to also communicate this other narrative. Yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eleonora. Any other question, or we leave some space for Stefania? Stefania, do you want to?
Yes. Well, thank you for the questions. The issue of paid care workers, you're right, Pana, I don't talk about that in the book, because my main characters are the Claudio and Maria, which represent, in fact, the unpaid labor of earthcare. Unpaid not in the sense of not in the sense of traditionally traditional social reproduction theory, but more in the sense of labor that has emancipated itself from the wage relation, because Claudio and Maria come from a history of labor struggles in the Amazon. That is the history of Chico Mendes. It's the history of the extractivist movement that still exists, and it has reclaimed the autonomy of labor from the wage relation, from capital. So this is a historically very important story to keep well centered in the Anthropocene narrative, because it gives visibility to the alternative possibilities. But at the same time, I am also confronting the issue of paid care workers. I don't do it in the book, but I've been doing it more on a more let's say activist, engaged academic work that I have been doing during the pandemic, and I'm still doing. And so I have learned, I have followed debates in this field, and I have learned some things on this. For example, what I've learned is that the care workers are at the same time those who are those who cannot afford care themselves. Most of the care workers, globally speaking, are Black women or women of color that with many of them with immigrant status, and they don't earn enough to be able to afford access to care services for themselves, their families. So they are overburdened with care work, paid and unpaid. And so this is one of the forms of injustice that have to do with the way in which care work is undervalued, even when it is valued, because here we are talking about paid care work, so it is valued, and part of this work is even valued in a capitalist sense, because there has been a lot of privatization of healthcare services lately, no? But even when it is valued in capitalist terms, it is undervalued, and it still reflects the inequality, the racial and gender and global and class inequalities that that we know about. So this once again tells us that the answer cannot be to these inequalities cannot be claiming, turning all of care labor into waged work. This is not the aim. When we talk about, I have been participating in the care income campaign, but care income is a very different concept than wage. And this is the part of how the wages for housework movement has evolved 40 years, 50 years after. So we're not speaking about wages anymore. We're speaking of a form of economic recognition and support that allows people precisely to get more and more liberated from wage relations, to be forms of economic reward that would come from a public public recognition of this work as essential work, but this as a form of liberating people from the need to work for a wage, and also considering the ecological of this work that people do, not only in supporting in domestic care work, but also in care work practiced on the in their territories, no, with their communities, and also with the land through urban farming, for example, or peasant agriculture, and different forms of caring for healthy relations between humans and the land. And how all this is relevant, is important for the ecological transition. It's actually essential. It's central to the ecological transition. So the aim here would be to allow for this kind of work to be autonomous from capital. Yeah, that is the aim. About narrative justice, well, yeah, thank you very much for the comments. I'm really glad that you picked up on that, because that in fact was my main goal with this book, to make. I wrote an article a few years ago called Telling the Right Story, where I tried to conceptualize this narrative justice approach, and so this book was my attempt at walking the talk of narrative justice. So I'm glad that you found it useful. How can we academics? Well, yeah, we academics are well positioned to do narrative justice, I would say. I think that we have to see it as a struggle within academia, primarily, a struggle to make our stories not only visible and heard, but make them central, make them upfront, make them relevant, and central to the post-carbon transition. This is a struggle that we, as social scientists, environmental social scientists, and also in my case, I don't see myself as a social scientist that much. I see myself more like a humanities scholar, but we also are well positioned to do this kind of service. No, we have to see it as a service somehow. But we have to struggle for authority within the academic community, because there will always be some more powerful, let's say, narrative trying to sideline ours as secondary. So I think this is what I see as the struggle.
Thank you, Stefania. I have a comment from Brototi Roy, and maybe this will be the last round of comments. Well, let's see how long it takes. Is there some, yeah, can you turn on the microphone?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you so much for writing this wonderful book and this presentation. I would like to applaud or like draw attention to one specific aspect of the book that I really enjoyed was the whole section with the poem, and it was so beautifully done, and the fact that there is so much richness of concepts, of understanding, of analysis in very non-academic ways of doing things, and linking it with narrative justice that you were talking about right now, and also environmental justice storytelling. Yeah. It is super important when we are trying to do work which engages more and more with queer ecologies and decolonial thinking. And I wanted to share this experience of every time I go back and speak with indigenous leaders and activists, you always get this, I always keep hearing that we're so tired of just being bodies in protest, you know, we're just so tired of people objectifying us and not listening to us. And the fact that you did it so wonderfully with the poem, and also with taking all the statements from the people in Brazil was really, really powerful. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Brototi.
Thank you. Yes, I think we have a lot to learn about the format and the way of telling, writing this book. I think there's a nice example for all of us. No comments, suggestions? Come on, don't be shy. This is going to end soon, so this is your moment.
I have a question. I'm Annie. I'm just beginning my PhD journey, so I had a question, and my work is interested in looking at alternatives to mainstream narratives. So can you, Stefania, offer some recommendation on how what are the sorts of concepts one might engage in, or how one might go about theorizing about things that we find on the field? Because if we use the concepts that are part of the meta-narrative, how do we think about an alternative imagination? Because then we are thinking from the structure of the meta-narrative, so to speak. So do you have any recommendations? I know very little about all of this, but I know Gibbs and Graham have written something about diverse ecologies, diverse economies, and then Fletcher's written an article about ecologies. So if you have any suggestions, that would be helpful and save some time. Thanks.
Well, yes, thank you, Annie. I don't have, a complete methodological framework that I have prepared. I've gone much more, let's say, naive with my narrative. But what I can tell you is that one particular effort that I had to do upon myself, like challenging myself, was that of really looking for voices that are already out there and tend to be sidelined in respect to the academic narrative. And mostly the academic narrative is usually what we consider most authoritative is the Anglophone, the mostly white academic scholarship that comes from the global north, from the top universities, etc., etc., etc. So I'm not saying that this is not good scholarship. This is excellent scholarship in its own right. But until we stick with that, we want to learn different things, and we want change, as you say. We won't be able to exit perhaps the master narrative, or at least the way this is also the master criticism of the master narrative, no? So and today perhaps there are the advantage we have today is that that communication is so much more developed than there is one good thing about the present. So we have actually access to voices much more than we did in the past. So, for example, if one effort I did in the section on race and coloniality was that of sidelining all the excellent scholarship that has been produced by Anglophone scholars and take into the account scholarship from Black and Indigenous scholars and activists. And public intellectuals, and like Ailton Krenak, for example, who is not an academic, but I think his latest book, and he has another book after that, even more recent, which is called the Life is Not Useful, A Vida Não É Útil, which I think is a further step into his critique of the master model of modernity. So I think this is one simple thing that we can do, resisting the temptation of relying upon Anna Tsing and Donna Haraway and all the excellent scholarship that we have, but still, you know, going directly to the voices that are speaking since a long time, because this is not recent. One of the books that I rely upon in that chapter is a book that is from the 90s, from Winona LaDuke, who has been an incredible, really, figure in the North American environmental justice and indigenous movement. So yeah, this I would say is really very basic advice I can give you. And then also of looking at different ways of these different narratives, such as poetry or filmmaking, for example. There are now films made by indigenous filmmakers telling about themselves, and I think that is something that is very, I mean, something that we should really be grateful for. Looking for these different ways of telling the story and making them relevant, even though they are not conceptualized in the terms in social science language. So also getting rid a little bit of this dependency on the academic language. Of course, we have, if we are producing academic literature, we also have to be careful not to be recognized and to be accepted by our tribe, let's say, the academic one. So of course it's a difficult, but I think that we can today, for example, the environmental humanities are an academic field that is enabling people to do that, to make a claim for different forms of communication in different languages as also equally relevant. So there is hope.
Thanks, Stefania.
I think that's a very nice message to finish the session. There is hope. And thank you so much for this amazing book. And I think the content, the structure, the things you're saying and the way you're saying them, I think are really useful to all of us. So thank you very much. And I hope we will be able to have presential meetings, seminars in the next years. But I think even we had like more than almost 50 people today. And I think that would not be able if we were meeting it here at UAB in a physical room. So I think this was also the opportunity for many, many people from very different places to hear you. What was talked today is being recorded and will be uploaded in the YouTube channel of the Environmental Justice Project. I just put here in the chat the link. And so if you want to share the presentation with friends, colleagues, please do. And thank you very much, especially to Stefania Barca and to all of you for being here today in this encounter. Take care.
Thank you very much. And please give me 2 seconds to look at the chat box, because I didn't, and see if, the comments that were there. So don't disconnect immediately, okay?
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.